Welcome back to the 36th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with Mark Greaney, author of the thriller novels On Target and The Gray Man. Also, I just wanted to add, if you ever want to leave a voicemail and give me some feedback, I would welcome that. I recently received a great voicemail from Anna, a listener, who suggested some interview questions for future interviews, which I plan to do. You can give me a call at 413-84-BOOKS. That's 413-842-6657. Stay tuned for my interview with Mark Greaney.
Well, this is Jeffrey Deaver, author of, most recently, The Burning Wire, and soon to be author of the next continuation James Bond novel. I spend a lot of time writing, a lot of time researching my books, but when I'm not doing that, I love listening to the Reading and Writing Podcast, which you can hear at readingandwritingpodcast.com.
Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Mark Greaney, author of two popular suspense thrillers, The Gray Man and On Target. The novels feature court gentry, an assassin very skilled at his profession. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Sure. On Target, your second novel, was recently released in paperback. If someone listening hasn't heard of Mark Greaney before, can you give them a sense of what they can expect with On Target and Court Gentry?
Sure. They're action adventure thrillers, and they're centered around my hero, Court Gentry, who is known as the Gray Man, and he's an American assassin in the private sector who is a former CIA, what they call a singleton operator. He worked solo around the world, and due to a falling out with the CIA, he's now in private practice, let's say. But he works for some sort of surly, nefarious guys, but he only takes hits against people that he deems righteous hits. He goes after who he considers to be bad guys. So he's considers himself something of a paladin and a good guy, even though he's working with some really awful people around the world.
Great. Well, Court Gentry, your major character, as you explained in The Gray Man and On Target, is a skilled assassin. In On Target, we get a little more sense of Court's backstory as he tries to get off or shake off the painkillers that a doctor prescribed him. Did you enjoy writing that backstory and giving readers more of a sense of who Court is?
Yeah, in a large measure, what happened is at the end of the first book, he goes through a lot of damage in The Gray Man, the first novel, and in order to survive his wounds, he has to do a little convalescence between the period of the two books. The second book picks up about, let's say, 3 months after the end of The Gray Man, and his physical wounds, let's say, have mostly healed, but he's still suffering from a bit of an addiction to the painkillers, and the book starts with him trying to get back into into his work, which he feels is very important, but he's definitely suffering. He's definitely the worse for wear after the things that happened to him in the first novel. And I just felt like you should be, if you're going to do this kind of character and have him suffer this type of damage, you should sort of be honest with the physical and mental toll that would take on somebody. So, yeah, I enjoyed, I feel like the books are a bit over the top. There's tons of action, but at the same time, I wanted it to be a fair and real portrayal of what somebody who, goes through this sort of, lives this sort of life, has to deal with.
Right. The thrillers that you write have international settings. How do you research your books? Have you traveled to a lot of the settings that you write about?
Yeah, I've traveled to a lot of them. It's not always necessary. I went to most of the countries in Europe that are in The Gray Man. I actually sort of followed around the route the character takes. And On Target, I went to Ireland, which is one of the settings. And On Target is Ireland. A large part of On Target takes place in North Africa, in the Sudan. And I didn't actually go there. I was sort of forced to. It's not illegal for an American to go there, but it's pretty problematic. You sort of have to be invited in.
Probably not advisable.
Yeah, it's not advisable. There's some danger to it. It's very expensive, and then you're sort of stuck in a package tour if you go. So it wouldn't necessarily help me for my research purposes. And then you end up with something stamped in your passport to where Homeland Security in the United States is going to be looking at you funny for a long time to come. And
Sure.
I thought, wow, for the advance that I got to write this book, I'd probably spend the whole thing just getting into and out of the Sudan for a couple of days and then dealing
Sure.
with the aftermath of that. But I did a ton of research with books and with movies and with videos, and I subscribed to some online open source security newsletters and things like that. So I did a lot of reading on the area.
Great. Well, you also provide the readers with a lot of details regarding the guns that Court uses. How much research do you have to do for the weaponry that you write about?
That's something I decided from the very beginning that I would try and portray as accurately as possible, and I'm glad that I have, because it's appreciated by a whole lot of readers. I hear from people more than anything else, police and law enforcement, and other law enforcement and military, private security contractors and stuff like that. That they always thank me for my books being the ones that actually portray weapons and small unit tactics in an accurate way, as opposed to the way a lot of people just sort of, I think, get a lot of their information from movies and things like that, which is pretty wrong. But I do a lot of training with in live fire shooting, tactical shooting. There's a firearm school a couple hours from where I live, where I've just become almost a fixture there, staying in the bunkhouse and training with the guys. And it's a place where a lot of high-risk civilian security contractors, like the bodyguards that work over in Iraq and Afghanistan, for example, they do a lot of their training there. There's military, there's SWAT teams training there, and I train with these guys, and I'm not as good and I'm not as fast, and I'm not putting myself in harm's way as often as they are, but I like to at least get an understanding for not just the weapons, but also the guys themselves. Some of the dialogue from my books is the funny stuff and the raw, rugged stuff, comes directly from stuff I've heard people say or talked about, while staying in the team room with those guys. So I think it's an important aspect of this type of book to portray the guns and tactics correctly, but also to, honestly just portray the type of guys who wear a gun on their hip or over their chest for a living, and that's something I try and do.
Great. What was the path to publication like for you? Have you always been interested in writing, and how much writing did you do before you wrote your first novel, The Gray Man?
I call myself a really long-time failure. I spent about 20 years writing my first book. I got an idea for a first novel, and literally I spent 20 years on that exact same story, picking at it, losing pages that I'd written, and floppy disks that I had things saved on, and then starting over. And it was always this one plot and this one story, and it took me about 20 years, and I finally finished the novel and immediately shelved it, started working on something else, and finished that in 6 months. And somewhere along the line, I realized that I really enjoyed the writing itself, and it wasn't so much just about the project. That one long book was just this albatross around my neck. And then once I realized, I like getting up early in the morning and going to a coffee shop and writing for a couple hours before work. And once I did that, the pages just started to come. And I think it was really my third finished novel which got the attention of my agent, and my fifth finished novel is the one that we published and became The Gray Man. So, it definitely wasn't an easy road, but
Sure.
I made a lot of mistakes in that first novel and got those out of the way and just kept writing and worked like that.
Great. Well, thriller novels never seem to go out of style. For example, Lee Child's Jack Reacher novels hit the bestseller list with every book that he writes, and there are many other good writers working in the genre. Who are some of the thriller writers that you enjoy reading?
I was on a real kick of classic, Graham Greene and Jean Le Carré and, the older Frederick Forsyth and stuff like that when I wrote The Gray Man, and I think that style kind of translated over into that type of a book. He's a guy skulking around in the shadows in Europe, and it's not overly laden with technology. I mean, it's basically a guy with a knife and a gun through most of it, even though it doesn't ignore the technology that exists now. I think that would be a pretty false way to write a contemporary thriller. But I'm a huge fan of an author named Ralph Peters, who I never think has gotten the respect that he deserves. Gerald Seymour is a British writer who's just had great book after great book.
And Ralph Peters, what are some of his books? What is he writing?
Now he actually writes in a couple of different genres. He's written some historical fiction about the Civil War, which is great stuff, but his thrillers, there's a book called The War in 2020, there's a book called Perfect Soldier, Twilight of Heroes is a fantastic novel about the fall of communism, and he wrote a book called Red Army, which came out in the 80s when he was a really young guy, and it was used in a lot of military training because it was sort of the invasion of Europe from the Soviet perspective, and he was a military colonel at the time, or he was in the military at the time. He actually retired a colonel, but he's a fantastic thriller writer, and he has a lot of emotion and a lot of detail and a lot of knowledge of international intrigue and stuff like that, and I've really learned a lot from. I never really took writing, classes to be a writer. It was all sort of just learning from reading books that I liked, and I like Daniel Silva and Frederick Forsyth and Nelson DeMille. I mean, I could go on and on. I'm more of a reader than I am a writer, even still. I'm just a big fan of a lot of these guys.
Right. How's it been to meet some of those people?
Oh, it's been great. It's been really, really neat. I met Lee Child. He actually wrote a blurb for The Gray Man, and he enjoyed it, and I got to meet him, and I met David Morrell a couple of times, and I'm a huge fan of his. I met Joseph Fender, and I think he's a great writer, and a bunch of others. So yeah, it's been neat because I'd gone to a couple of writers conferences before I was published, just sort of trying to meet an agent type of thing, and then now when I go to them, I actually find myself sitting in the lobby bar with real writers and stuff like that, and it's totally pinch myself, and I learn a whole lot, just having conversations with them.
Right. With your writing process, are you someone who outlines the book extensively before writing, or do you write organically and see where the story takes you?
Not extensively. I with my contract, I had a 3-book deal, and the 3rd book, Ballistic, will come out next year. So we're talking about, extending the Gray Man series after that. But, for my editor, I sort of put together a certain level of outline just so he knew what the book was going to be about. So he realized I wasn't, trying to write a vampire novel or, one of those cozies or something like that. I think he wanted to know he was getting the same thing, that he bought in the first novel. So I do outline, which helps me, but it's basically just to give an overview of where I think the story's going, and then I write the book and see how close it comes to that. I don't really look at the outline throughout. I just have the idea in my head. And my editor's given me a tremendous amount of freedom, and he just asks me at the end of the process if that's even before he sees it, basically that's a story that you wrote. And I write pretty organically. I don't write from page 1 to page 500. I just get ideas of where I think the story should go, and I'll work on parts just as the mood strikes me or as I get ideas, and then put it together at the end with what I call like the connective tissue. You have all these scenes, and then there's how the guy gets there. Does he get there in a truck, or does he walk, or does he ride a donkey? And all those sorts of things. That ends up being kind of at the end, as I have to sort of put in certain details. But that's the process. It's more of a synopsis and less of an outline that I do at the beginning, and then I forget about it and write the book.
Right. If there are aspiring writers listening to this interview, what advice do you have to someone who is trying to write and get a novel published?
I think the conferences, that they're expensive and you have to travel to them and things like that, but I really think that they're very, very important. Thriller Fest or the Maui Writers Conference. I actually met my agent at a conference in San Diego. So I think those things are valuable. Another sort of thing that a mistake that I see people make, I hear everybody say, believe in yourself, and this sounds terrible, but it's like some people believe in themselves a little too soon, and I think that you need to just sort of put your stuff out there and have people tell you what's wrong with it, and say, okay, I'm willing to work at it, and this is going to be tough. And the number one thing I need to do is not just to think I'm great and then put something out there and just assure everybody that it's fantastic. It's like write something, be prepared to get a really, really rough criticism of it, and then go from there and say, I can improve. The other thing, the main thing that anybody can do is just read a lot of books. And I read mostly in my genre because that was what I was interested in, espionage and military thrillers and just action fiction and stuff like that. I've read books, obviously, in other genres, but I've mostly read in that, and I think that really helped me. I don't necessarily read to learn. I read for enjoyment, but you can't help but pick up things and kind of get a feel and a style and ideas and stuff like that as you read. So that's really, really important for writers.
Great. What are you working on now? What's up next for you?
Well, I'm finishing Ballistic, which is the third book in the Court Gentry series, the Gray Man series, and that's due to my editor on November 15th, so I am working on it now physically. I've got it open right in front of me, and I'm just about done with that, and I'm really happy with how that's going. And after that, I met with my editor a couple weeks ago, and we talked about where we would go with book 4 and, in a very general sense, book 5. So hope to take it from there. I have some other ideas for non-Gray Man books, so I'm going there. The Gray Man, the first novel, was optioned for a film, and they've written a screenplay, and it's out to directors, and it's in development right now. So hopefully they're saying 2012 would be a release date, if everything works the way it's supposed to. And so hopefully that would sort of propel the series a little bit. And I'm willing to write these books. I would never write the same book twice, but as long as I had fresh stories for Court Gentry, and I have a few in my head, I'd like to keep doing these.
Great. Where can people find more information about you online if they're interested in learning more about you and the books that you're writing?
Yeah, my website is markgreaneybooks.com. It's Mark, M-A-R-K, Greaney, Greaney, books.com. And then it has, links to my books and more information about me and the research that I do and the training that I do and stuff like that. And I'd love for people to go there and friend me on Facebook and take a look at what I have, see if it's something that interests them.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Mark Greaney, the author of 2 popular suspense thrillers, The Gray Man and On Target. And On Target was just recently released in paperback and is available in bookstores everywhere. And I'm assuming, Mark, they're available as ebooks as well?
Yep, they're ebooks and they're audiobooks, audible.com as well.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
This is Lee Child, and I'm listening to the Reading and Writing Podcast.
Thanks for listening to my latest podcast. If you have a chance, please leave a review of the podcast in iTunes. It only takes a moment. Until next time, read some good books and be well.
In South Dakota, we're looking forward to exploring new roads and wide open spaces. When you're ready to travel, go great places. Learn more at travelsouthdakota.com.
Own the road with T-Mobile, the leader in 5G. Whether you're cruising through Nashville on I-40, heading down I-90 to Boston, or touring Santa Cruz in the 5, you'll be covered by the largest 5G network. T-Mobile covers the most interstate highway miles in America with 5G.
See 5G device coverage and access details at T-Mobile.com. Most reliable according to independent third-party Umlaut from crowdsourced user experience data from January to July 2021. Fastest according to Open Signal Awards based on average speeds in USA. 5G user experience report July 2021.